As a lot of you might have noticed, our favorite company Microsoft has decided to shut down Windows 10 updates. They once said Windows 10 would be the last Windows. The goal of this video is to make this statement true for as many people as possible. So let's begin. With the death of Windows 10, an enormous amount of users are once again forced to switch to another OS, whether it's Windows 11 or a whole other operating system. When it comes to deciding which OS would be the best choice for the future, there is most likely just one correct answer: Linux. Let's figure out some reasons why this is the case. Let's begin with some technical advantages of Linux. Performance. First of all, I have to mention the performance. Due to the fact that Microsoft injected more and more useless bloatware into the Windows operating system, it has become incredibly inefficient and resource intensive. While you can run Linux on a potato, Windows requires a decent amount of performance just to run somewhat smoothly. And even with decent hardware, it is incredibly slow. Linux, on the other hand, has no real requirements. Because of that, it runs a whole lot smoother and better on old hardware, even on some systems where Windows 11 can't even run anymore. That is a pretty big deal for basically everyone, because if your OS has no huge overhead and is easy on your system's resources, you have more power for the tasks that really matter to you, like gaming or heavy workloads. And it runs a lot more stably. That leads me to the next point: stability. The famous blue screen from Windows is not only famous but omnipresent, because Windows crashes and freezes quite a lot, even on decent hardware. And unfortunately, there's nothing the user can do about it except cry. Linux, on the other hand, due to its open source nature, allows every user, if they are decent enough at programming, to even fix the issue in the kernel or where it occurs themselves. I mean, if your fix is good, it could even get merged into the official Linux kernel, and your name will be in the Linux history books for writing a piece of code so good that it would be accepted by Linus Torvalds himself. If you're not able or not willing to do that, it is no problem either, because in Linux, every bug or error is fixed pretty quickly due to it being open source and developed by users for users, unlike other operating systems. Looking at you, Windows. Meanwhile, Windows is only backed by Microsoft. No company on this planet can keep up with the whole open source community. Just look at the proprietary Internet Explorer versus the open source Chromium browsers. Oh, and why do you think the majority of servers are running on Linux? It's because even though the stability of Windows has slightly improved over the years, the Linux kernel is just way more stable and reliable. Updates. While Linux allows every user to decide on their own if and when they want to update their system, Windows forces users to update their system not only frequently, but at a hilarious rate. Even though they update it so much, it rather gets worse than better. The updates make the already heavy and inefficient OS even slower and more resource heavy. But luckily, the updates are all just to improve the user's privacy, right? Right? Nah. Recall, diagnostic data collection or telemetry, personalized typing and linking, a de facto keylogger, Cortana and voice data collection, OneDrive autosync, and cloud integration. I could keep that list up for hours, but I think you get the point. You can theoretically disable these things, but just because you set it to off, do you really know it is disabled? Windows is a proprietary OS, where even Microsoft employees have access to only the parts they absolutely need to develop it. Even though privacy is one of the most important topics of our digital age, I will not go into great detail because it's just too much for this video. If you want more information about privacy and the data Windows collects, let me know in the comments down below and I will make a separate video about it. For now, the conclusion of this topic is the following. Windows has evolved into a mass surveillance OS, disguised as convenience features. Do you want real privacy? Use Linux. But on Windows there are a lot more threats than just Microsoft itself. Due to the sad fact that it is so widely used, there's a ton of malware, viruses and trojans out there for Windows. Linux, on the other hand, is far more secure, because on one hand there are just way fewer malicious programs out there, and on the other hand the Linux open source community consists of really good programmers who are interested in keeping the system safe, unlike Microsoft. Let's look at at the user experience and the workflow. First of all, packet managers. Even though a lot of people are afraid of Linux because you can't just download some exe from the internet and install a program that way, I really have to say that this fear is mostly unreasonable. On every Linux distro, you have a program called a package manager. Which package manager it is for you depends on your distro. For example, Debian-based distros use the apt package manager, Arch and Arch-based distros use Pacman. Installing a program with these is really easy. I will use Arch as an example. If I want to install Spotify, for example, I don't have to go to the internet, search for a downloadable exe file and execute it. I just open my terminal, type sudo pacman-s Spotify and hit enter. No 5 seconds later, Spotify is installed and I can open and use it. You can say what you want, but this is peak comfort. And for those who don't want to use the terminal, even though it's a great tool, you can use a graphical interface to install programs. It depends on your distro and desktop environment what this is called, but it is essentially the free and open source version of the Microsoft Store. If you want me to present some good distros, desktop environments and everything related, let me know and I will make a video about it. Versatility. Next, we have the incredible versatility of Linux. With Linux, you have a companion for every occasion. No matter the task, Linux will get the job done. Nearly. There are some exceptions, like Adobe programs, but there are also workarounds. So if there's a will, there's a way. But it really doesn't matter who you are. If you are a power user who wants 100% control over his machine and OS, Arch is made for you. You will find everything you could dream of in Arch. So basically a blank distro that you can control and configure, aka real freedom. If you're a beginner or just switching from Windows to Linux, there is Ubuntu or Linux Mint. On these distros you will find every functionality the average user can dream of. They are simple to use and look just beautiful. But there's also everything in between Arch and Ubuntu. Using Linux means being versatile, being free, having true liberty. Gaming. Gaming on Linux was not the best in the past, but as I said, in the past, there were incredible improvements in that field. Even Valve, the company that owns Steam, chose Linux, particularly Arch, for their Steam Deck. And they poured a lot of money into ensuring the gaming experience on Linux is as good as possible and getting better by the day. Today you can play nearly every game available on Steam on Linux, except multiplayer games requiring a kernel anti-cheat. But using an anti-cheat that digs itself that deep into the kernel is probably in general not a great idea. Some games even run better on Linux than on Windows. At least I experienced it that way. Thanks to Proton and Lutris, gaming on Linux is at its peak and will become even better in the future. So if the only thing keeping you on Windows is gaming, you can now calmly switch to real freedom without sacrificing your hobbies. Customizability. An incredibly insane advantage of Linux, one that's nearly a cheat code, is the great customizability of Linux. And I don't mean some advanced coding things, I mean the graphical user interface. You can make your Linux system look exactly how you would like it. Only your imagination is the limit. You can put a custom CSS in Discord, customize the way you interact with your OS, and a lot more. There's a gigantic and really deep rabbit hole you can go down if you're interested in this topic. The act of customizing your distro is called ricing.
Welcome to the rice fields, motherfucker!
That is possible because of the open source nature of Linux and its distros. That is truly amazing, isn't it? Wanna make a Minecraft theme? You can. You want a cozy system that perfectly fits your mood? Absolutely possible. You name it, Linux can do it. Thank you, Linus Torvalds. So now some honorable mentions for the long term. On Linux, there is no forced TPM and secure boot. TPM stands for Trusted Platform Module. It is a small chip on your motherboard that controls security features and stores passwords. If you use Windows, Microsoft has full control over that chip and all the data on it. They can, will and do send all the data to their servers and store it. Furthermore, some computers don't even have that chip. These computers simply cannot use Windows because Microsoft forces users to have and use this chip. Next we have Secure Boot. The purpose of Secure Boot is to ensure that only specific signed software can boot. That is a problem because Microsoft decides what is safe and signed. So they determine which bootloader is able to boot on your system if you use Secure Boot. This is problematic because it gives Microsoft more control over your system while limiting your own. Needless to say, that is a bad thing. Independence. We already established that if you use Linux, you are free and not dependent on some huge tech corporation. Even though that may not sound like a big deal at first, it can make a huge difference in the long term, especially when big tech wants something from you. If you use Windows, they will just take it, probably without even asking you. But if you use Linux, you are in the privileged position to just say, fuck you. Long-term support. A lot of Linux distros have way longer support periods than Windows. Take Windows 10 for example. Support for it is ending. Operating systems from big tech can just drop support whenever they feel like it. If you use a community-made and maintained distro like Arch, there will be support as long as people care about that distro and use it. And that is awesome. You can choose your distro and just stick with it. As times and threats change, your distro adapts to these new threats and you can simply be happy with it. Speaking of long-term use, due to the specific hardware requirements, a lot of users switching from Windows 10 to 11 would need to buy a new PC, even though their old system works perfectly fine for them. But Windows forces users to meet specific hardware requirements or it just won't function. Linux does nothing like this. A little fun fact, Windows itself implemented a Linux subsystem in the OS called WSL. So even Microsoft knows the truth. Linux is just a better OS. What do you think about the best OS? Is it Windows or Linux? I hope I could show you some new perspectives and advantages of Linux. Needless to say, Linux is better.
Until we meet again!